Didn't argue when my son-in-law said it. I just stood there in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold, staring out at the backyard where the snow was coming down in that slow, quiet way it does in November, in Nova Scotia. And I thought, okay then. My young son Elliot was sitting at the kitchen table behind me. He'd been humming something, one of those little melodies he makes up, just for himself, not for anyone. And when the phone call ended, he stopped humming and looked at me and said, "Dad, is everything okay?" I told him yes. I told him everything was fine. I put the phone down on the counter and I started making pancakes, because that's what we do on Saturday mornings, Elliot and me. And it was easier to crack eggs than to explain to him that his older brother's wife had just told me, through his older brother's voice, that maybe Elliot shouldn't come to Brandon's promotion dinner. That maybe it would be simpler for everyone. Let me back up. Elliot is 23. He was diagnosed with autism at 4 years old. Though honestly, looking back, the signs were there from the time he was 18 months. The way he'd line up his toy cars in precise rows, the way certain sounds would make him cover his ears and press his face into my shoulder, the way he'd go somewhere else in his eyes when a room got too loud. His mother, Diane, understood him in a way I had to learn. She was patient in ways that didn't look like patience. It looked like just knowing to dim the lights before dinner, knowing which grocery store was quieter on which day, knowing that when Elliot said "I am fine" 3 times in a row, he wasn't fine at all. Diane passed 7 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. And in that time, she made me promise 3 things. Take care of myself, don't sell the house, and keep bringing Elliot to his woodworking class on Thursday evenings, because it was the thing that made him most himself. I've kept all 3 promises, mostly. Elliot's woodworking. I can't describe it the way it deserves to be described. He started the class at the community center when he was 15, and for the first 2 years he made things that were rough and lopsided and wonderful. A birdhouse with a door that didn't quite close, a small shelf with one end higher than the other. He didn't care. He'd hold them up and look at them with a kind of satisfaction that I found, honestly, moving. He saw something in them that I couldn't always see. Then something shifted around year 3. I don't know how else to say it. He started slowing down. He started measuring twice, 3 times. He started asking his instructor, a retired carpenter named Gus, questions I couldn't have thought to ask. He started spending Sundays in the garage with the door open, just thinking, sketching things in a little notebook with a green cover. By the time he was 20, Elliot was making furniture. Real furniture. A side table with hand-cut dovetail joints. A rocking chair, level and smooth and built to last, that he made for me and that sits in the living room to this day. When people come over, they ask where I bought it. When I tell them my son made it, they don't believe me at first. His older brother Brandon didn't grow up the way Elliot did. Brandon was the kid with the easy smile, the one who made friends in the first week of school every single year, the one who got the athletic scholarship and moved to Halifax after university and married a woman named Kristen, who was very organized and very concerned with what things look like from the outside. I say that without pleasure. It's just true. Brandon loves Elliot. I believe that. But loving someone and being comfortable with them in front of people you want to impress, those are 2 different things, and Brandon has always struggled with the second one. When Elliot was younger, Brandon would tense up at family gatherings. He'd hover nearby in a way that wasn't protective so much as anxious. He'd answer for Elliot before Elliot had a chance to speak. He'd make a small, apologetic face at people when Elliot rocked back and forth or said something that landed strangely. Elliot noticed. He noticed everything, always. He just never said so, because Elliot doesn't waste words on things he can't change. The promotion dinner was Brandon's idea, or Kristen's, I was never sure. Brandon had been made regional director at his logistics company, which is a real achievement, and he wanted to celebrate with a dinner at a restaurant in Halifax, a nice restaurant. The kind with cloth napkins and a wine list. He'd invited his in-laws, some colleagues, a couple of old university friends. He'd asked me to come 3 weeks earlier, and I'd said yes right away. Then he'd been quiet for a moment and said, "And Elliot?" I said, "Of course, Elliot." And he'd said, "Right, yeah, of course." But then came the Saturday morning phone call. Brandon on the line, his voice a little too even, a little too careful. He said Kristen was worried the restaurant might be overwhelming for Elliot. He said the colleagues attending were people he was trying to make a certain impression on. He said maybe it would be better, easier for Elliot, really, he said. For Elliot, if this one time it was just a smaller group. Just adults. Just the people who knew each other well. I listened to the whole thing. Then I said, I understand, and I hung up. Behind me, Elliot had stopped humming. I poured batter into the pan. The snow was then falling outside. After a minute, Elliot said, Are we not going to Uncle Brandon's dinner? He always called Brandon Uncle Brandon when he was younger and it stuck, even now that he's an adult. I don't know why. I never corrected it. I said, We're going to have our own dinner. Just us. What do you think? He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I flipped the pancakes and got plates down from the cupboard. Then he said, Can we go to the Cove? The Cove is a little restaurant in Mahone Bay, about 40 minutes from our house. It's the kind of place where the booths are worn smooth and the menu doesn't change. And the waitress, a woman named Ruth, who has been there since before I moved to the area, always calls Elliot on and never rushes him when he's deciding what to order. It's his favorite restaurant. It's been his favorite restaurant for 12 years. I said yes. Of course yes. The dinner at the Cove was on a Thursday, same evening as his woodworking class. So we went to class first and then drove over while the last of the daylight was still orange over the water. Elliot had finished something that week. A small cabinet, 2 shelves, with a carved panel on the front door. He'd been working on it for 3 months. Gus had kept it at the community center for a fundraising display they were setting up, and Elliot had agreed to donate it for the silent auction. At the restaurant, Elliot ordered the fish chowder and the apple pie and drank 2 ginger ales. And he talked to me for nearly an hour about the joinery technique he'd used on the cabinet door, explaining it in the particular detail he brings to things he cares about. I understood maybe 40% of what he was saying. I nodded at all of it. Ruth refilled his ginger ale without being asked and winked at me over his head. On the drive home, Elliot looked out the window at the dark water and said, Dad, do you think Mom would have liked the cabinet? I had to keep my eyes on the road for a second before I could answer. I said, Elliot, I think she would have kept it in the living room and told every single person who came over about it. He smiled at the window. Yeah, he said, she would have. I want to say I wasn't bitter about the dinner. I want to say I was at peace with it. That I understood Brandon's anxiety even if I didn't agree with it. That I let it go the way you're supposed to let things go at 64 years old. And mostly I did. But that night after Elliot went to bed, I sat in his rocking chair in the living room. And I thought about Diane. I thought about all the time she had stood in the space between Elliot and the world's impatience with him, steady as a wall. I thought about how she always said he doesn't need to earn his place in this family. And I thought about how, 7 years after her death, her older son had essentially told his younger brother that he hadn't earned his place at a dinner table. I sat there a long time. In the morning, my phone started buzzing before I'd finished my first coffee. The first message was from my sister-in-law, Diane's sister Colleen, who lives in Dartmouth. She said, Victor, I just saw this. Call me. Then there was a voicemail from Gus. Then 3 texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't understand what was happening. I called Colleen. What had happened was this. The community center fundraising auction had taken place the previous weekend. I'd forgotten I'd meant to go. And Elliot's cabinet had sold. It had sold for $1,100, which was by far the highest sale of the evening. The woman who bought it was a furniture dealer from Chester who had apparently stood in front of it for 20 minutes before placing her bid and then had asked Gus afterward who made it. Gus had told her. And then, because Gus is the kind of man who is proud of his students in a way that is completely uncomplicated and good, he had posted about it on the community center's Facebook page. A photo of Elliot standing next to the cabinet, not quite smiling. Elliot doesn't do posed smiles, but with that expression he gets when he's pleased. Eyes soft, hands at his sides. Gus had written about Elliot's 8 years in the class, about the rocking chair and the side tables and the way Elliot approached joinery like it was a language he decided to become fluent in. The post had been shared for 37 times by the time I called Colleen. In the comments, people were asking if Elliot took commissions. There were messages from a woodworking community in Halifax that wanted to feature him. A journalist from a regional arts magazine had reached out to the community center asking for contact information. And Brandon had seen all of it. because several of his own friends had shared the post and tagged him, not knowing, or maybe knowing perfectly well, what had happened the week before. Colleen said, "He called me this morning. He was upset." I said, "About the post?" She said, "About the fact that he missed it. That he wasn't there." I didn't say anything to that. What happened in the following weeks was not something I engineered or planned. I want to be clear about that. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything myself. I just answered the phone when people called. And I said yes when Elliot was asked if he'd like to be interviewed for the magazine. And I drove him to Halifax when the woodworking community invited him to speak at one of their monthly meetings. A casual thing. Just a few dozen people in a church hall. But Elliot prepared for it like it was important, which it was. He spoke for about 20 minutes. He brought two pieces he'd made, the side table and a newer thing, a small wall-mounted shelf with a living edge that he'd finished in October. He explained his process in the same way he'd explained it to me in the car and in the kitchen and at the cove over the years. Precise, methodical, detailed, with occasional long pauses that he didn't seem to feel the need to fill, and that the audience, to their credit, waited out. Afterward, a woman came up to him. She made and sold handmade goods online, she said, and she wanted to know if he'd ever considered selling his work. He said he hadn't. She said he should. He looked at me. I shrugged. I said it was entirely his decision. He said he'd think about it. He thought about it for a week and then told me at breakfast that he wanted to try. Brandon called me on a Sunday in January. Kristen was out, he said, the way people say that when they want you to know they're speaking for themselves. He said he'd been following everything that was happening with Elliot. He said he was proud, and I could hear in his voice that he meant it. And I could also hear that he knew it wasn't enough. He said, "Dad, I should have handled it differently." I said, "Yes." He said, I didn't think it through. I was worried about how the evening would go and I made a bad call." I said, "You told your brother he was an inconvenience." There was a long silence on the phone. Outside, the snow was doing that thing again. Slow, patient, filling in all the edges. Brandon said, I know that's what I did." I said, "He noticed, Brandon. He always notices." Another silence. Then, "Can I talk to him?" I called Elliot in from the garage, where he'd been measuring boards for a new project. I handed him the phone and I walked to the other end of the kitchen and looked out at the backyard. I didn't listen to what was said. That was between them. After about 15 minutes, Elliot came and handed the phone back to me. He said he wants to come see the garage. I said, "What did you say?" Elliot said, "I said okay, but he has to wear the safety glasses." That spring, Elliot sold his first commission. A couple in Wolfville had seen the magazine article and contacted him through a page I'd helped him set up. They wanted a dining table, 6 seats, white oak, simple lines. They gave him a budget and a timeline and trusted him completely, which was the right thing to do. He worked on that table for 11 weeks. He went through 17 sketches before he was satisfied with the proportions. He drove to Wolfville twice to measure the dining room and look at the light. The day he delivered it, the couple met us in their driveway and walked us inside. And when they saw it set up in the room, they didn't say anything for a moment, just looked. The woman said, "It's going to be in this family for 100 years." Elliot stood next to me and looked at the table and said quietly, almost to himself, "Good." On the drive home, he slept in the passenger seat, which he does when he's truly tired and truly at ease. I kept the radio off and watched the highway and the bare fields going past, and I thought about Diane and what she would have said seeing him like that, asleep and peaceful and finished, having made something real that would last. She would have reached back and squeezed his hand without waking him. I drove home in the dark, and I was glad to be his father, and I was glad to be alive to see it. I've thought a lot about that Saturday morning phone call, not with anger, that passed a long time ago, but with the kind of quiet clarity that only comes when enough time has gone by and you can finally see the whole shape of something. What Brandon did wasn't monstrous. That's the thing I keep coming back to. He wasn't cruel. He was scared, and he made a decision out of that fear, and the decision hurt his brother in a way that couldn't be undone by an apology alone. I know he understands that now, but the hurt happened, and Elliot, who notices everything, always, carried it quietly the way he carries most things, without complaint, without drama, just stuck somewhere inside him alongside all the other times the world had decided he was too much. What I've learned, watching Elliot build things in that garage for the better part of a decade, is that the world has a way of correcting itself when you stop trying to force it. Not magically, not fairly, not always, not on any schedule you can plan around. But there's a kind of logic to how things unfold when a person simply keeps doing the right thing with their whole self. Elliot didn't set out to prove anything to Brandon or Kristen or anyone at that promotion dinner. He went to his class on Thursday evenings because he loved it. He measured and sketched and sanded because the work deserved it. He donated that cabinet to the fundraiser because Gus asked him and he wanted to help. None of it was strategic. All of it was honest. And that honesty, that absolute uncomplicated commitment to doing good work and being a decent person, that's what opened every door that followed. The auction, the article, the commission in Wolfville. None of it came from ambition or calculation. It came from character, from the kind of integrity that doesn't need an audience to function. I think about Diane a lot when I think about this. She used to say that the most important thing you can give a child isn't opportunity or talent. It's the belief that their effort matters, that what they do with their hands and their mind and their stubbornness is worth something, regardless of who's watching. She built that in Elliot. I just tried not to knock it down. And what Elliot did, what he continues to do, quietly, in that garage with the door open on warm evenings, takes a kind of persistence that most people underestimate because it doesn't look dramatic. It looks like measuring a board 17 times. It looks like driving to Wolfville twice just to check the light in a dining room. It looks like saying, I'll think about it, and actually thinking about it, seriously, before deciding. That steadiness, that refusal to cut corners even when no one would notice, that's not a skill. That's who he is. I'm 64 years old, and I've made my share of mistakes as a father. But I stayed home that November evening, and I took him to the Cove, and I listened to him talk about joinery for an hour, and I said yes when he wanted to try selling his work. Those weren't grand gestures. They were just the right calls, made one at a time. Sometimes that's all it takes. Just keep making the right call. The rest has a way of finding its own level.